acronym for What was that, Dan? Oh, recording in progress. Okay. It is an acronym. IONS is an acronym for Institute of Noetic Sciences. It was begun in 1973 by Edgar Mitchell, who was the lunar landing module pilot for Apollo 14. And Edgar Mitchell, like several others of those few who walked on the moon in the Apollo program, had his own takeaway from the experience, and his was, as he was returning to Earth and seeing the Earth from afar as a pale blue dot, he had a unity consciousness experience, and he was motivated from that moment forward in his life to dedicate the rest of his life to exploring the frontiers of consciousness, especially the interface between science and spirit. So he established, with the help of a donor, IONS as a vehicle for that purpose, and it has been going ever since. And we in Richmond have been lucky to be a community group of IONS, which it sponsors all over the world. Ours has been going since January of 1996, and we've been meeting, come what may, monthly since then with outstanding monthly speakers and so forth, and are now one of the oldest continuously operated IONS community groups in the whole global network. And also, I would say, without qualification, we probably have the most ambitious and robust speaker program of any IONS community group in the global network. So we welcome everybody who's here, whether you are a long-time participant or a new member or a new joiner here. The only thing required for membership in our group is just showing up. There's no qualification other than that, and we welcome one and all. We also operate solely on the donations of those who join us either in person or on Zoom, and so we would invite everyone who attends to make a love offering in our basket, which is in the back of the room here, which we'll pass around for those who didn't do it on the way in. And we appreciate that. We also ask that anyone on Zoom who would like to contribute also go on our website, which has a PayPal function and allows you to make a donation by credit card through our website on PayPal. Anyone who would prefer not to do that may, if they choose, send a check just payable to Richmond IONS or Central Virginia IONS, and they can send it to me at the address that's on the email that goes there with the monthly flyer. And so that's where we are for today. I'm not going to introduce the speaker yet because we're going to have an opening meditation, and that meditation will be handled by Faith Grigger. Come on ahead, Faith.
Thank you, Tom. First, I would like to say, that's good. First, I would like to say that we are really in for a treat today because this book is amazing. And Suzanne, from my perspective, is a way shower. She's opening the whole political scene through her efforts and through the words of Thomas Jefferson. And it's such a beautiful thing, this co-creation that Suzanne has made happen with spirit. And I wanted to read something from the book. And so this work of Thomas's and Suzanne's and Jana's is dedicated to America's next generation of leaders, right? And Thomas Jefferson's message to us is this: carry the light. And he's telling me to say, friends, we must carry the light together. And then his final words in the book that I'm going to share are carry the light, convene the circles of integrity. So if we would close our eyes together and we can place our hands on our heart with the intention of creating union. Union to bless Suzanne and the amazing foundation that she has facilitated, to bless the founding fathers and mothers and children, those who are back now with us, and those who are working in spirit. Thomas's strongest message is one that's been coming from my father as well. My father left his body about a month ago today. And my dad's message that is in complete alignment with my father's is we humans need to remember that there is so much to shift and accomplish on earth now that it's ridiculous to think that we could do this alone, whether as individuals or even the collective of human. It's ridiculous. The plan, the grand design, was that we do this together with spirit. So we have to ask. We have to ask for Spirit's help. Please remember that, all of us, everywhere, and share that message and let the circles convene. This is how we're going to convene, or this is one of the ways. Every human has their special call, like Suzanne's, and everyone in here. Let's just continue to remember that we were designed to co-create with Spirit. This is the time to remember that and to step into that level of trust and belief. Because many, many of the challenges on the planet now are ones that really need that spiritual assistance. So how beautiful that we have the opportunity to co-create in real time with Spirit now. Thomas is also saying, listen everybody, listen up. The young people, support them. Get out of the way and let them step up and give them the support they need. They were designed to issue in this energy with our love and support. So seek to support them and to embrace them and to hold them. Seek to listen to them. Not just share your wisdom, which is great, but seek to ask them what is in their heart, what is in their mind, what do they care about? Get out of your spiritual ego, wise ones, just as we had to do as founding fathers. Listen to each other. Listen to the children. Listen to Spirit. Find your way back to your heart. And hold your heart. Hold that light together with everyone you meet. Okay. So Thomas seems to be satisfied with that. Blessed be to one and all. Blessed be. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Faith. As Faith has alluded to, our speaker today is Suzanne Munson. Can I be heard on this, Dan? Okay, you don't need to move then. I am really delighted that Suzanne, I met, she and I met, what, 7, 8 years ago, something like that. Our respective spouses had just passed away within a year or so before that, and she was looking around for something new to do, and other than have tea on the patio at the Country Club Virginia, and so invited her to IONS, and she was in the process at that time of working on a book about George Wythe, and lo and behold, she came. The first meeting she came to was one that was our speaker was a woman who had just relocated to Virginia from California, and had written a book called Conversations with Jerry and Other People I Thought Were Dead, and this was something that Suzanne took to heart, and there was a medium named Jana Anna that had been the source of the materials in that book, and lives out in Indiana, and Suzanne thought, well, I'm going to contact that lady and see if I can get some information about my subject of my book, George Wythe. And so she did that, and didn't come out of the closet with respect to that information within the context of that first book, but has made a giant leap forward in the context of the book that we now have from her, the Metaphysical Thomas Jefferson, which has gotten her notices and appearances on things like Coast to Coast AM, which she now comes to us from as a national celebrity from having been on that with George Norrie and so forth. And so she has, as Faith alluded to, she's got an absolutely wonderful piece of material here, and brought Thomas Jefferson to life in addition to some disclosures about his not so secret relationship with Sally Hemings. He also does speak wisdom at a level that he probably could only have dreamed about when he was a physical incarnate being, even as the author of the Declaration of Independence. So without further ado, I give you Suzanne Munson. Thank you.
Well, Faith, that was just a lovely, lovely introduction. Thank you so much. Well, I'll have to say that I would not be giving this talk to just anybody. You all are my woo-woo friends. I have gone out on a limb with this book. As a matter of fact, an acquaintance of mine who's very smart but very much in the material world said, oh, I wish you wouldn't have put your name on that book, because it really, I think it hurts your credibility. So anyway, I'm very glad that this group is gathered here today, and you're not afraid of the paranormal. You're not afraid of ventures into the non-material spiritual world. And I feel very much at home here, and thank you for coming. And thank you for all you Zoom people who Zoomed in, and I hope you can hear as well. So we start with a slide. We can get that up. Start with the first slide. Yes. So we start with a quotation by Thomas Jefferson from Real Life from 1826. Is there a way to see the full quotation? Okay. And this is the way I start the book. All should be laid open to you without reserve, for there is not a truth existing which I fear, or would wish unknown to the whole world. Well, one day I was reading some spiritual literature, and I came across this almost exact quotation, and it's from Jesus Christ and the Gospels. So Jefferson was a spiritual person, not a religious person. So next slide. There. So we come to the book under discussion today, The Metaphysical Thomas Jefferson, what Jefferson might say if we could access him from his place in spirit, and also if we could do so through a trusted medium. Next slide. So this brings me to the first book, which I discussed in May of 2019 with this group. And as Tom alluded to, I did connect with George Wythe for that book, but toward the end. And I had to know why I had such an intense interest in this individual. And by that time, I had been using this medium, Jana Anna, to connect with my late husband and various others. And so I thought, well, I'll just ask for George Wythe and see what happens. And so she brought him through. And the first part of my talk was all about the historic George Wythe, as was my book. And I used all the traditional historic resources for that, all material resources. I did get some spiritual advice from him, but I was very careful about what I included in the book. But that's just part of my personal story that I shared with you. So I wondered, why do I have this intense interest in this individual? He was a wonderful individual, and he was greatly respected in his age, but largely forgotten in the 21st century. And so I spent, thousands of hours on the book. It's a real big book, footnotes, bibliographies, and all that. So finally, I did connect with him toward the end, and I found out that I did have a life with him. Of course, I don't tell many people this. I just tell you this. But that we had a life in Williamsburg together. That it was a brotherly, sisterly relationship. If I had to guess, I would say I was the wife of his brother-in-law, his wife's brother. That'd just be a guess. I don't know. He was very fond of his brother-in-law. So anyway, he used to come over to my house in Williamsburg, and we would have tea or brandy or something, and we'd talk about the events of the day and politics. And then he went on to say that he got some of his best ideas from me. But being a female, he couldn't give me any credit for them. He would repeat my ideas to his male friends as if they were his own. And he was sorry that he couldn't credit me for it, but no one would pay any attention if it came from Ms. So-and-so. So then I thought, well, that's why I'm writing this book. Maybe I'm writing about some of my own ideas, which was pretty cool. I don't know whether that's true or not. But so then when I asked him if he liked my book, he said, our book. He said, I'm helping you with this. And I did feel guided. I did feel that I was guided in that book. And so then I said, what should I add to the book? And what have I left out? And he said, you should put more feminine energy in it. I didn't understand that at the time. I didn't know what feminine energy meant. And so I said, well, I can't make anything up. This is not a fiction book. But I did make up a minor character who was kind of like myself, who dressed like a man and wanted to hang around where the men were talking about important things. So when I finished the book, I asked him what he thought about it, and he said he was pleased with it, that it brought out his gentler side, his humanitarian side, and he was known to be a very gentle human being, a wonderful individual. So anyway, that book was the springboard to kind of a lecturing career that I've been doing since then at continuing education affiliates at universities and historical societies and so on. So the next slide, he had quite a resume there. I won't go into all that, but any of you who've read the book will know that he was certainly an individual who needed to be revived in the 21st century. Most of my two books that I've done so far, the driving force has been American government, the democratic republic that our founding fathers gave us, what's happened to it since then. And so George Wythe was my springboard for that, for the servant leader, for the need for ethical leaders. So this brings me to the topic today. This book. So the question that is, I just answered this question. What prompted my interest? I guess I'm a little slow on the slides we go on. So this is the book we're discussing today. So next slide. I'm often asked, what in the world gave you the idea for this book? And next slide. As Tom alluded to, I attended an IONS meeting. Was anybody here for this IONS meeting? I think it was in 2015 anyway. It was one of my early meetings. 2014? Oh, that was really early, yeah. And so I heard Irene Kendig talk about this book. And also, there's up in the left-hand corner, you see that it was a winner of a major award. And I thought, well, if the book is that worthy, you know, I think this woman, the medium, Jana Anna, has got to have some credibility. I think I'll contact her. And I had already run into an amateur meeting at a writer's retreat up at Nimrod Hall. And this was 6 months after my husband died. And so I said, do you think you can contact my late husband? And she said, well, yeah, probably. So she went in her room and came back a half hour later with yellow notepad full of notes, and she described him perfectly. So that was my first venture into mediumship. So after this IONS meeting and this presentation, I got up enough nerve to call the medium, or to email, go on the website and email the medium, Jana Anna. She lives in Indiana. And she lives in Bloomington, and so we would agree. The way it works is we set an hour, probably the next week, she will give me some times that she has available. So we'll say 3 o'clock Tuesday. So she calls me on the dot at 3 o'clock Tuesday. And I put my telephone on speaker. And then in those days, I was just writing longhand. When I did the Jefferson book, I was typing on my laptop to get as much as I could. She records the sessions and later sends you the recordings. So I found it very interesting to write complete notes because I didn't want to go back a year later and listen to a whole hour of conversation. I wanted to get to the core very quickly. And like most mediums that I've run into, hers is a calling. She wants to help people. So we go on to the next slide, the central question. Does life continue after physical death? And I know I don't have to go into this very much with this group because I think most of you do believe that, but a lot of people don't. And so when I talk with people, and in the introduction to the Jefferson book, I try to lay on as much scientific evidence as possible, starting with the near-death experience of proof of the afterlife. And I also found this quote from the New York Academy of Sciences that afterlife studies are the most exciting frontier in science today. I thought that was awesome. And this is what Edgar Mitchell, our founder, wanted to do. He wanted to bridge spirituality with science, and that is happening. And particularly the starting point for me and for a lot of people is the near-death experience explosion of studies that's taken place. Also, when I'm talking with Earth people, I always throw in University of Virginia, because there are a lot of those grads around, that the people up there are studying these things. They're not afraid to study afterlife. give research into the afterlife. And so that all started, as everybody here knows, with Dr. Raymond Moody back in the 1970s, and it's still continuing. And they are studying, as most of you know, reincarnation and even mediumship. So, next slide. So, I was brought up, as most people were in the 20th century, to believe that mediums were charlatans. They got a really bad rap in the 19th and 20th centuries. Maybe some of them were charlatans, but I believe some did have abilities that they were never given credit for because the world was stuck in almost 100% materialism. But I have found that the good mediums are healers, connectors, facilitators. There's a lot of unfinished business when many people die. And so when you contact a loved one through a medium, this is a way to heal a lot of relationships. And so the good mediums are in it for that reason, to help people. So again, I throw UVA in for extra credibility whenever I'm talking about this. They are studying now mediumship up there. They don't talk about it very much. And also, when there was an article about their reincarnation studies in the UVA journal, there was, for alumni, there was a nasty little note about, is this where our taxpayer dollars are going? And so they had to make it clear that this particular division was funded privately, not by taxpayers. So, next slide. The question is, if we can connect with regular people, why not somebody famous? So I did connect, I believe, with George Wythe, but I also asked, well, before that, I asked Jana, the medium, I said, have you ever connected with historic figures? And she said she had, and she had helped some writers from time to time. And I didn't get any more information about that. I didn't know who had been accessed or who the writers were. So next slide. A couple of years ago, I continued to have personal readings with the medium after I had completed the George Wythe book. I had lost a dear friend and my mother, father, late husband. There were a bunch of people I wanted to talk to. And so before I did the Jefferson book, I had a couple of readings where the same thing came through in each reading. And so before she gives me a reading, the medium, Jana, gives me what's coming to her from my people on the other side, my guides, whoever else is looking over me or giving me advice. And so she said, what's coming through, this is the first thing I see about you today. Now, sometimes she sees me as working too hard. And my father says, you got to have more fun, you know. But this particular reading was, we are seeing you very clearly as a scribe. We are seeing you as a metaphysical historian. And again, I take really good, careful notes. I write as fast as I can, so I wrote that down. And then I sort of forgot about it because we were going on to other things. And so a couple of months later, this was during COVID, I looked at my notes and I said, what does that really mean? That's got to mean something. I'm being seen as a scribe. I'm being seen as writing important things down from the past for the present. Metaphysical historian, I really like that term, but really what does it mean? So again, going back to the question, if I can access regular people, why not somebody famous? So I thought, well, I think I'll talk to Thomas Jefferson. So I asked the medium, again, if she had channeled historic figures. She said she had. And so I made an appointment with her, but I did not give her any advanced forewarning, any advanced knowledge of who I was going to ask for. And so we started out cold. She said, what do you want to do today? And I said, I want to talk to Thomas Jefferson. And so she didn't miss a beat. And Actually, I had accessed Jefferson once before for the With book because he was, With was Jefferson's mentor, and I wanted a paragraph or two from him. And the first thing out of Jefferson's mouth at the time was, well, I've been waiting for this. Like he was waiting in the wings. He knew I wanted to hear from him. And I think that was true of these other sessions that I had with Jefferson. What I understand from what I've read, I have no knowledge of any of this myself. I don't have any gifts, is that there's some kind of like green light if you're thinking about somebody on the other side. They know that you are, and they sort of come closer and they respond to you. I don't know how it works, but that's what I've been told. So Jefferson was standing by. He knew that I wanted to talk to him, apparently. So anyway, I accepted her word that she had brought Jefferson through. And I never heard Jefferson. I only heard the medium. And I was very surprised with what the cadence that came through. I expected an 18th century formal cadence to the words. But what came through was very modern terminology, used terms like ego. When I asked him about UVA and student athletics, he said cash cow, which I thought was a modern term and very appropriate. And so I had to explain that in the book, because if you just get the book and you just thumb through it and you see this modern dialogue that's going on, you might think I wrote it, and we'll get to those questions about whether I wrote it or not. So I asked him if we had known each other in a previous life. I was thinking maybe we had a really good connection, but we really didn't. He said our paths had crossed before, but apparently there was no significant relationship like marriage or sister or brother or anything. Not anything that I could come up with. So next slide. So there are only 3 ways to look at the book. I wrote it. The medium made it up. Let's see. Or it's possibly a truthful account. So I have 8 hours of recordings where I'm clearly the one who's asking the questions. I'm not providing the answers. So you can take me off that list. Let's go back to the other slide. Okay, so the second choice is the medium made it all up. Okay, the medium, Jana Anna, majored in elementary education. She hated history as a subject, and she knew very little about Thomas Jefferson's personal life. She didn't know who Sally Hemings was, for example, and she didn't know much about some of the other founding fathers that we brought out. And so if she made all this up, she's a genius. And she has powers far greater than I do. I could never make up the dialogue that came through. So the third conclusion is that we may be hearing from a spirit who is presenting himself as Thomas Jefferson. So then we go to this slide. Is this a work of fiction? You decide. And so that's in the beginning of the book. You don't have to believe that in mediumship to read this book and to find value in it. The book has value no matter who wrote the words. About American government, foreign policy, the media, the use of the military, higher education, religion, all of these subjects are covered in the book, and it's worth reading. So, next slide. The premise of the book is, if you could talk with Thomas Jefferson, what questions would you ask? So I thought it would be fun to ask some bona fide Jefferson scholars the question. And of course, I never told them what I was doing, really. I said I had taught at Chautauqua. I tried to beef up my teaching credentials, and that this was going to be a class project in the future. If you could talk with Thomas Jefferson, what questions would you ask? So I went on Amazon and I looked up the authors of the 8 living authors of 8 popular books about Thomas Jefferson. And somehow I found their emails and we connected. And 8 nice men, all men, got back to me, thinking it was a class project. And they gave me some good questions and I added some of my own. So that's how it got started. And so next slide. I had 8 one-hour sessions with this entity. They were 2 weeks apart so that I could go back and listen to the recordings and fill in anything that I couldn't type during the sessions. And the interviews, it's very important to know when the interviews took place. Between March and August of 2020, and I think everybody in this room will remember a few of the things that were going on nationally during that time. By phone, recorded. So, next slide. What do you think Mr. Jefferson would say about any of these things? So we're going to take just a couple of minutes, and Jim is going to hand out a questionnaire, and if anybody needs a pen or pencil, just take 1 or 2 questions or 1 or 2 topics and write down what you think Mr. Jefferson would say about these issues today. And then we'll get into what he says. So we don't have time for you to answer, for you to write your answer to all of these questions, but just pick 2 or 3 that are appealing to you, that you have curiosity about. Oh yeah, how many people have read the book? Okay, well you've got a leg up. Oh, yeah. But for those of you who have not read the book, maybe you should raise your hand first about how you think he might respond, not having that knowledge. Yes? Yes. He's very concerned. Yes. Well, we'll get to that in a minute, his views about the media. Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm. Well, we didn't talk about that, but that's an interesting question. I'm sorry, repeat the question. He would say that convicted felons should not be members of Congress. He does believe that a lot of people in Congress are behaving feloniously, if that's a word, behaving badly, and probably deserve to be in jail. But, yeah. Okay? Mm-hmm.
What aspects of American development would you focus on to create a stronger trajectory for our country today?
A question, what aspect of America's development would you focus on for a stronger America today? Okay, that would be covered, we're going to cover that in the government response. Yes. Yes, Carol.
So a lot of people Jeffersonian Bible, and I think he would, and what he did was he took several different Bibles and he cut and pasted different chapters together. So my thought is that he would ask people to think about what is true.
Yes. So Carol said that, reminded us that Jefferson had written what is known as the Jefferson Bible. I think it's called The Life and Morals of Jesus of Nazareth or something like that. And what was the rest of your?
He cut and pasted what he felt was true.
Yes.
He completely left out things that he didn't resonate with. And so I think that suggests to us that if we sat and thought about what is true, what would we come up with?
Yes.
That's what he came up with, but I think he would say to all of us, what would you come up with?
Yes. He did take the Gospels in several languages, and he put them up on the wall, and he did a cut and paste job to try to find the truth of Jesus' words. And he would ask us to do the same, actually, to be critical thinkers, and not just to swallow the party line, either in religion or in politics, very much so.
When he wrote, "All men are created equal," was he thinking all human beings, or was it limited to the white race?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and that's covered in the book. So the question is, when he wrote, "All men are created equal," was he thinking about all of humanity, or white males? And he does address that. The question was in the book, if you could rewrite the Declaration of Independence, how would you rewrite it? And he said that there'd been a lot of quibbling about words in the Declaration, all men. And the medium said he made a raspberry noise about that. That he thought that was just quibbling about minor issues, that he thought it was a very good document. But also, throughout his what he shared with me, he did share that he was a product of his environment, and it was dominated by white males, and that was the place from which he came.
So, was Jefferson and the other radicals of his time in the colonies interested in separating from England so as to preserve slavery?
No, not Jefferson, no. The question is, was preserving slavery a big reason for separating from England?
That was because already previously in England, slavery had been made illegal.
Right.
And to continue to be loyal to England would have done away with slavery in the colonies as well.
Yes. In his youth, Jefferson was very much opposed to slavery. He was an abolitionist in his youth. And he always thought it was a horrible blight on humanity. It's just that for financial reasons and other reasons, he never freed his slaves. But he was always opposed to the practice. But, and so there, in the book, someone had said, there were two revolutions. There was the war, the American Revolution, and then there was a revolution of ideas that happened after that. Jefferson said something very surprising in the book. He said, when we broke away from England, it was just a transfer of taxing power. We went from one boss to another, from the king to Congress. It was just a transfer of taxing power. That we still, in the early days, and in Virginia still very much now, are very oriented to English ways and English thinking and the hierarchical way of arranging society and thinking about who's on top and different levels of privilege. So, yeah, but he wanted to be free from England for reasons of personal freedom, individual liberties. That those were the things that drove him primarily. Okay, anybody else before we move on? And we'll have answers to these questions. Oh, Zoom people. Okay, can you read any questions? Okay. All right, well, let's move on to the next slide. Jefferson on American government and how it has evolved since the founding fathers. Is he happy or not? No, he is not happy. He's very discouraged about what's going on in Washington. And this is not just what we were talking about in 2020. This goes back a very long time. For those of you who know 19th century history, you know that there was a great deal of corruption in Congress in the 19th century. And it spans not just one or two administrations, but many administrations. So we move on to the next slide. So he said, my colleagues and I left good building blocks for the government. That's what he called the Constitution. Our other founding documents were good building blocks. And in the beginning, our government was a great deal less complex than it is now. It's gotten to be a giant right now with many tentacles. He said, we had most of these building blocks assembled when I left, but looking at them now, I see that they've been reassembled in ways that we did not intend. The structure has lost its power, its purpose, and is very far from the original design. And he wants us to go back and actually read the Constitution. I wonder how many of our present members of Congress and others have actually read the Constitution. He wants us to go back and read the Declaration of Independence, the noble ideas that were shown in that wonderful document. And so the end of my book includes the Declaration of Independence. And I don't know that I had ever read it in its entirety, but it's well worth reading. It's beautifully written. So next slide. So I asked him what his greatest concerns were about American government now. And the reply was corruption, self-interest, and conformity. He said that power and money are the greatest corroders, and they have been for some time. That as soon as a candidate throws his hat or her hat in the ring, it becomes infected. Many representatives are not representing the public. As their bank accounts enlarge, they become servants to special interests. And of course, none of this is new. We all know this. But he's just confirming it. He says that he does try to talk to the new people who come into Congress before they become corrupted. But it's very, very easy to have your values eroded when you have access to so much money, so much campaign money. He's very concerned about all the money that's involved in running campaigns. And it feels like we should get rid of that, and the people running for office should go back to shaking hands and greeting people. And he said all of these slick ads that you get, they're just all touting the party line and not the truth. And so he's very concerned about all that. Next slide. Yes. I can't read it. Mm-hmm.
Wrote a book about the reincarnation of Tom Jefferson that's still alive today, and Casey Newman. What are your thoughts on getting messages from him if he's still alive today?
Okay, I knew this question would come up. How many of you have heard Joanne's talk about Thomas Jefferson? Okay, in her talk, she said that back in some decades ago, when Edgar Cayce was alive, that Edgar Cayce had a vision that Thomas Jefferson was going to reincarnate in the body of a child who was to be born to some people that he knew. And so after this is not in the book, but I did ask a question after the book was published, because I was curious about it. So I had another session with Jefferson. And so he said that, yes, that was true, that he and Edgar Casey and some others did have good plans for this young man. Jefferson wanted to inhabit his body or lend his spirit to his body. But as Joanne said, the environment was not conducive for this young man to grow up to be a leader, an independent thinker, an educated man. His parents gave him very poor upbringing. And so he just could never rise to that occasion. And so Jefferson said he withdrew his energy from that being. What we have to remember, what I'm learning, I don't know any of this myself, but what I'm learning is our souls are far greater than our bodies, than what's contained in this one body. I know, Tom, you'll attest to that. Tom's soul is way big. But if we were to look at all of our souls here gathered today, we would be amazed at how great, how large our souls are. So it's possible for somebody like Jefferson to lend part of his energy to somebody in human form, but not necessarily in his entire energy, that he's reincarnating his whole self into physical form at one time. That he's always connected to a greater being, greater forces. But yes, that there was some validity that they had high hopes for that young man. But the environment made it impossible. But yeah, that's a good question. And it's a complex question. So, so I think Jefferson would agree with all these comics. Members of Congress should wear sponsor jackets like the NASCAR drivers so we can see who owns them. He's very concerned about corporate ownership of people in Washington. Will Rogers said, we have the best Congress that money can buy. And Will was talking back in the 1920s and 30s and 40s, so it's not new. And then someone else said, every now and then an innocent man is sent to Washington. And Jefferson does talk about that. He does say that some of the new people coming in do have good intentions, and he tries to whisper in their ears and remind them of their oaths of office. And he said, you know, the Spirit walks the halls, these halls that once were sacred in Congress. He's there. And that's one thing that I have to tell people in the book who read the book. You know, he's very much aware, he's very current with current events. And I used to have this fantasy, I honestly did have this fantasy. I've always been fascinated by Jefferson, but I had this fantasy that I would dig him up from his grave, but he'd be, you know, nicely dressed and everything, and put him in my car, and I would ride him around University of Virginia. And I would show him, now look here, now look at the women here. Look at the people of color. Look at all these Asians. Isn't this really cool? Look what's happened to your school. But the fact is, he's very much aware of everything that's happened since his death. And he does walk the halls of Congress, and he does hang around the University of Virginia. And I don't think we have time to go into this today, but I did ask him about UVA and whether it's living up to his ideals. He said some on the faculty and the administration do remember his ideals and try to live up to them, but others have gotten away from it. And we'll get to this in a minute. So next slide. He said America needs a revolution, not a bloody revolution. He always believed in revolutions every now and then. But he said we need not of war, but a revolution of integrity. And that wise individuals should sit down with the original documents and study them. But first, you must form circles of integrity to get anything good done. Next. So he said, so another chapter was on the Founding Fathers, and I don't have time to go into all of them, but I'll just go into two, George Washington and Alexander Hamilton. But first of all, he said that over the years, people had made frozen icons of the Founding Fathers, that they were just flesh and blood individuals. They were doing their best to bring about a noble idea for the people, for posterity. But they all had their faults and their foibles. He said we were all bastards in our own ways. But so when I asked about George Washington, he said that he was Washington's vice president for a while. And he said that Washington, in modern terminology, again using a modern term, had suffered from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, which would be very logical because Washington not only saw blood and guts in the Revolution, and a lot of it in the Revolution, but he saw it in the French and Indian War as a young captain. And so he said that Jefferson's mind, that Washington's mind was not always present. Sometimes he had his foot in another place, but that he could always go to him for advice about matters of war and diplomacy, that he would listen to that. But that he did have his problems, his physical problems, and this post-traumatic stress disorder, which I thought was pretty interesting, but logical. And about Alexander Hamilton, how many have seen Hamilton play? Okay, so anyway, he was aware of the play, but he hadn't seen it apparently, or he wouldn't have said what he said. So he said, who would have thought that Alexander Hamilton would become a song and dance man? Which I thought was kind of cute. And he said he thought Hamilton was a little embarrassed about that. And he said, I hope nobody turns me into a song and dance man. And I said, well, by the way, you are in the play singing and dancing, so maybe you should see it. And then when he got into their differences in policy, Hamilton was a strong federalist, a strong proponent of central government, strong central government. Jefferson was on the extreme side of states' rights side. And he said that Jefferson was a proponent of states' rights because he wanted to divide up power. He didn't want all of the power to be in one central place. That was very dangerous. And his idea was to diffuse the power among the states. At the time, there were only 13. He said, but all that's changed now. The states now have been so infused by the central government that the tentacles of the central government are everywhere in all the states. And there's less freedom and less individual power now than at the beginning of the country. So then we go to religion. I have a chapter on religion. Now, those of you who studied religion, you know that Jefferson was not a fan of organized religion. A lot of people thought he was an atheist or a deist or something other than a true Christian. And he still disparages organized religion. Now, you've got to remember he was in France in the 1780s. And even then, there was a lot of corruption in the established church. The greatest corruption, I believe, took place for anybody who's read Renaissance history during the Renaissance, when the popes were actually evil people and antichrist. And even through the more recent centuries, great collusion between religion and organized religion and the powers that be, the wealthy and those in government, the nobles, the kings and queens and nobles. Not so much emphasis on the average person, what would benefit the average person. So he's still very critical of organized religion. He said that the Christ energy is real, that Christ is present for those who call on his name, and his name has power. but that he has removed himself from much of organized religion. Because, anybody watching TV knows a lot of it is about money. It's about power. It's about judgment. It's about a lot of the things that Christ was not at all about. Now, I don't think he meant to condemn all churches. I think all of us know of religious groups that do practice kindness and generosity and love, that is present. But also the church, for anybody who studies history, has been greatly corrupted, I think, since I blame it on Constantine myself. About 3 or 4 centuries after Christ, he weaponized the church and politicized it. So we'll go back to that, if you can. The Jefferson Bible, I asked him what he thought of the Jefferson Bible. And he said, I'm very proud of that. And then he said, well, maybe I shouldn't say proud. And he said, I'm very pleased that I brought the truth out from that book. He said, but unfortunately, and as we all know, the Gospels were written some years after Christ died. And so people were trying to remember his words. And so Jefferson said a lot was left out of the Bible, a lot of the good things that Jesus had to say. Because in his place in spirit, he could actually go back. It's like a panorama on the other side. We can go back to the past and relive the past. And apparently he went back to listen to some of Jesus' sermons. And he said that those who put the Bible together had left a lot of good things out of it. And that he wanted to boil the Gospels down to the essential truths of Jesus. And as some of you know, he left out miracles because he thought they were maybe were superstitious. He wanted to leave all superstitions out of the Bible. So he took those out, but he said miracles, when I heard from him, he said miracles do happen, they happen. But he wanted to empower the people, that you have power. You don't have to wait on somebody to perform a miracle for you. We have way more power than we give ourselves credit for. And he says the Christ energy, which we've learned to study, some of us, is way bigger than the church. And he says that the Christ is accessible to us should we choose to access this being. So next slide. Okay, freedom of the press. I asked him about the media. He said the media, the freedom of the press was, even though he was a victim of it, as most of you know, he made an enemy of Mr. Callender who helped him in his political little nasty fight, writing some bad things about his opponent. But then when Jefferson wouldn't give Mr. Callender a job, I think he wanted a post office job or something, then he turned against Jefferson and he ratted on him about Sally Hemings and blew all that up. That Jefferson had a slave mistress and everybody on the hill on Monticello knew about it. But anyway, so that was freedom of the press. It came back to bite Jefferson. But nevertheless, yes.
One thing that should be noted is that Jefferson also used the press in his own day as a weapon against others in the same way it was used against him.
That's true. Jefferson used the press as a weapon against others, and it was also used against him. Yeah. But he still believed very much in freedom of the press, even that, even though he'd been criticized roundly in the press. And he said that that was a fundamental right that we wanted. Well, look what happened to that athlete from China who disappeared because she criticized a man. That's a recent example. He did not want things like that to happen in this country. So he said gradually the media have been bought out. We all know that. Our newspapers are collapsing and being bought out by financial groups with not that much interest, I think, in giving the public fair and balanced news, objective news. Special interests are trying to control the narrative. The liberals want their share of the media. The conservatives want their share of the media. Is there a question back there?
So it sounds like what you're saying is the news is fake.
It's biased. A lot of it's biased. Yeah.
I mean, they call CNN the communist news network.
The narrative, well, I long for the days when we all watched NBC, CBS, ABC, 30 years ago, and I think they actually did try to give the news a straight treatment to the best that they could. And now we do have some outlets that purport to be news but are really political tools. And that's very dangerous. So one thing Jefferson said he really missed on this planet, and he said planet, is critical thinking. That don't just swallow the party line, which most people seem to be doing now, but critically examine issues, examine all sides of an issue. And so he said, our only security is critical thinking. And then he said, and again, anybody just picking up the book is going to find this very strange because he knows about the internet. And he said, the controlling forces, and to some extent, he has an idea, which I found hard to accept, that there are people pulling the puppet strings at a very high level on the planet. I found that pretty scary, but that's what he said. And anyway, he said that they wanted to control all of the media, but the internet had gotten away from them. They want to control the internet. But that snippets of freedom and freedom of expression were available on the internet, along with a lot of BS. But he has some hope for the future. It's all not gloom and doom. Finally, after all the gloom and doom, I said, well, can't you say something positive? And so I would encourage him to say to just talk about a positive future that could unfold for us, and he did that. So the military, here we see a soldier kicking in something overseas. He said that the military was established with very simple goals back in his day, and they were to protect this country, not to protect our landmass and our people, but also our ideas. But the military, he said, now has just grown to be a giant employer. And during World War II, there were, as we all know, we remember when they tried to close these bases in little towns all across the place. This was a couple of decades ago, trying to be more efficient. Oh, there was all this hue and cry. What will we do? It's a major employer. So he says the military is kind of the employer of last resort for a lot of people, and that's not the intent of it. And he said that it's been used to invade other countries and other ways of life. And we've made a lot of enemies in the process. We go someplace and we stir up trouble, and then we gather the military around us to protect us against the trouble that we ourselves have stirred up. He's very, very much against war. He's not opposed to the military. He feels we should have a strong military to protect us. But he said it's gotten overgrown. And he said whenever somebody wants to make it efficient, for example, to close down a base in a town that needs the base, they get accused of being unpatriotic and soft on protecting the country. So there was a chapter on that. Next slide. Okay, now we get to race, slavery, Sally Hemings. We get to the juicy part. So obviously, I couldn't let him off without some talk about race and slavery and Sally Hemings. And some of these questions came from the professors, and one of the professors asked a student of his, a woman of color, what she would ask Thomas Jefferson. And she said, I wouldn't even want to talk to him. He was a racist, and rapist and all these bad things. And so for all the wonderful things that Jefferson did in his lifetime, right now he's being examined primarily as a slaveholder. And he was always on the defensive about that, having written the Declaration of Independence. He was always on the defensive. How could you write that and still have slaves? And there were a lot of reasons, mostly financial, why he didn't free his slaves, and I go into that in my 2 books. But he never supported the institution. He hated the institution. He just couldn't find a way out for himself. And he also justified it by saying that he was a kind master. He said he was kinder than most of the other masters. And he also said that he was a product of his environment, that he grew up thinking that these people were inferior. And that was ingrained in the entire society. George Wythe was an exception, and I think that's because of his Quaker background. But everybody else who grew up in the Anglican Church or any other church had this view, hierarchical view about color, and also about women. And this is another surprising thing about what came through Jefferson. Not only does he talk about the disenfranchisement of people of color, but of females. I thought that was interesting. And and particularly when we get to the University of Virginia, when females and people of color start going in there, he talks about his response to that, which we'll get to. But so we talked about slavery. He hated it, slavery, but he was a product of his environment. He wasn't making excuses for himself, but he said, if I were born today, I'd have a totally different psyche. I'd have a totally different way of looking at things. But I was born then. I did the best I could. And he's not excusing himself. He just said, I did the best I could in my environment. But I could have done more. I could have done better. So then something very strange happened. So I asked him if he had, about Sally Hemings. Did you have a relationship with her? Did you father any children with her? He was very cagey about that. He did not want to talk about it. And he said, well, I really don't want to go there right now. Basically, I'm paraphrasing. He said, that was that lifetime, and I have gone through that lifetime ad nauseum, and I don't care to really revisit it. And he said, I see Sally in our present form and spirit. I have always admired her. I've always had respect for her. And we interact as people do in spirit now. So I said, did you father any children with her? I couldn't let him off with that. And so he said, well, she was very attractive and it was easy to seed her. So, okay. So then the medium says, there's this female voice that's coming in. And again, it's the green light. You know, if we're talking about somebody in spirit, somehow they know. Anyway, so Sally got the green light. So and then the medium didn't know about Sally. She didn't know who Sally was. So she said, there's this female voice that's wanting to come in. Said, could this be a slave woman? And I said, yeah, probably, because we're talking about Sally Hemings. So then Sally comes in. And so she says, I was very disturbed by your two-faced way of treating me. You would tell me privately, you know, that you cared for me, that you respected me. But then publicly, you would never acknowledge me. And I was very upset by your two-faced way of behaving. And so then he kind of waffles about things. And so then at the end, then he said he always had respect for her, and that he was sorry that he couldn't show that respect publicly, but that he was trying to achieve really big things in America. And that would damage his credibility with his peers if his personal life came out. And if he were to say, oh, I'm having a great relationship with the slave woman, and she's really smart. But he could not be totally honest at all about that relationship. And so Sally said, yes, that she had had at least one child that was sired by him, that the child had his nose, his features. And there was a child who resembled Jefferson very much. He was practically white. He had red hair and looked just like him, who was sent away because it was an embarrassment for him to be seen on the hill there at Monticello. So that was that conversation. So it ended on a good note, though. Sally, again, from her place in spirit, this was only one life that Sally lived. She said, in that life, she said, by living that life, I made a difference, and I have no regrets from my time in the flesh now. And so she has made a difference in the 21st century. If you go to Monticello, you will see that her story is being told. The story of the slaves is being told as never before at Monticello. So she has made a difference, but it took a long time.
And wasn't Sally Martha Jefferson's half-sister?
Yes, the statement was Sally was Thomas Jefferson's wife's half-sister. They had the same father, and she was 3/4 white. She had long straight hair down to her waist, was very beautiful. Her grandfather had been a white ship captain. So it must have been very uncomfortable on the mountain there at Monticello to have, the two half-sisters there, one a slave and one the wife of Jefferson. One thing I do want to make perfectly clear, though, and I got really mad at Katie Couric one time for implying that Jefferson, like Bill Clinton and some of the others, had cheated on his wife with Sally Hemings. That was not true. His wife died young, and Jefferson was only 39 when she died. And on her deathbed, she made him promise solemnly that he would never remarry because she had been brought up by stepmothers and she did not want her children to be raised by stepmothers. He promised. He fell in love sometimes after that in France and so on, but he never remarried. And so he began the relationship with Sally. Sally was just a child when Martha Jefferson died, and later on he began a relationship with her. His mother, okay. So one of the questions from the historians was, who had the greatest influence on you? Well, I expected that he would say George Wythe, because that was why I wrote the book. But he said, other than my mother. I thought that was strange, because I had been told, I had read, the assumption had been made that he wasn't very close with his mother because he never wrote anything about her, only just a passing note after she died. So he said, my mother had her troubles. Today she would be treated with medications for counseling. But she did one thing for me that was invaluable. She listened to me. He said, as a boy, when I had something to say, she would drop everything and she would lock eyes with me and she would listen to me. And he said, you just don't know how valuable that is to a child. So that was, people asked me about the unexpected things that came through in the readings, and that was certainly one. Okay, next. So then I had to ask him about UVA and higher education. His criticisms of higher education are not just for UVA, but for the whole system as it has evolved. He said that some at UVA still adhere to his principles, but it's getting so big and so cumbersome. It's getting away from all that. Administration's top-heavy. There's more emphasis on the institution than on the students. Students sometimes are at the low end of the totem pole. It's overpriced. And he's very concerned about outside funding from corporations and from the government. He says this creates compromises, like you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back, I'll allow this, and it's like a creeping dependency that's come in. This great need for money. So this is causing a lot of compromises. And he wished there wasn't this dependence on outside funding. So I asked him about student athletics. He said, first thing out of his mouth was cash cows. And that in his day, there were student athletes, and they were pursuing their abilities. But today, it's all about star status. Has very little to do with educating the athletes. It's all about their path to riches and fame. And so not a fan of a lot of the things that are going on. Next slide. So I asked him, so finally I put him on the spot. I said, well, okay, we've had all this criticism. What would you do, if you were to come into life in this century? So what would you do as president and as a member of Congress? So he said, I would not come in as president. He said, you have to have people who will follow you first. And there are not enough people who would follow me, who would want to make the reforms that I want to make. You have to have a critical mass. So he said, I would come in first as a member of Congress. And then I would gather around me a few people who I felt had great integrity. And then we would try to enlarge that circle and have more and more people of integrity who wanted to do the reforms that I would like to see happen. And then from that group of stellar individuals, one would emerge as a presidential candidate. He said, I might run, somebody else might run. But first you have to have enough support for the changes that you would want to make. And he said right now that would be impossible the way things are today. So next slide. So he said, what should we do? I see, you must build circles of integrity. You must start with a good congressperson, a good senator. Make the best choice you can. Hope that person has integrity. And hope that person will connect with others in Congress and not get bought out by the special interests, want to serve the people. So, next slide. So what would our founding fathers say today about what would Jefferson and Washington and Madison and all those guys say about what is going on today? I think they would tell us to pay more attention, to get more involved, to guard the ethical foundations of good government. Unfortunately, since the generation of the founding fathers, politics has had a pretty bumpy road. In the early 19th century, this was early on, John Adams said, "One useless man is a disgrace. 2 are called a law firm. And 3 or more become a Congress." So even then, partisan politics had reared its ugly head. Later in that century, Mark Twain said, "Suppose you were an idiot, and suppose you were a member of Congress, but I repeat myself." And he also said, "Politicians and diapers must be changed often, and for the same reason." And then in the 20th century, Will Rogers said America had the best Congress money can buy. So it's been going on a long time. But it doesn't really have to be this way. We ourselves are allowing this to happen. And many people I know are so disenchanted with politics, they're turning off the news. I've had to limit my news intake because it's been so toxic. But I do try to stay informed. When we do try to turn on the news, we're finding that a lot of it is slanted. And so freedom of the press was what our founding fathers wanted, but we have to really be careful about the collapse of newspapers, the buying up of other media. Got to be very careful about that. And it's up to us to use more critical thinking about where we get our information. And regarding public service, what do we tell our sons and daughters? Don't go into politics. It's dirty business. We don't want to have anything to do with it. It's for scoundrels. So we'll meet you, no public discourse for us, so I'll meet you on the golf course. So it's been said that we get the government that we deserve. If we just sit on the sidelines watching the circus go by, then we deserve less than a stellar government. So Jefferson and others fought the establishment to extend voting rights to more people, to the average person. At one point, it was just for landowners, but they wanted it, the voting privileges extended to the greater public. And of course, the powers that be didn't like that idea, but eventually that reform took place. So we don't just vote in November and we complain about the poor choices. We show up at the June primaries, and before that at party meetings, little party gatherings, precinct meetings. I didn't know about those till I joined the League of Women Voters. I never even heard of a precinct meeting. But they are posted online, and maybe we should start showing up to some of those and add our point of view. So how many of us have written a check to support a political candidate, attended a precinct meeting? How many of us know the names of our local delegate or senator in the State House? How many of us have contacted our lawmakers about an important issue? So Woody Allen famously said that 80% of life is just showing up, and that's absolutely true of our political system. Tip O'Neill said all politics is local, it all starts here. So in conclusion, President John Adams wrote one of his sons this observation: public business must always be done by somebody. It will be done by somebody or another. If wise men decline it, others will not. If honest men refuse it, others will not. This was right at the beginning of our country. So our founding fathers would want us to step up to the plate and be counted. And lastly, Thomas Jefferson would say, democracy is not a spectator sport. So thank you, and if there are any questions, I'll be glad to entertain those. Any questions? Any Zoom questions?
So if anybody has a question on Zoom, put your hand up. You have your head and your reactions. You have a little hand you can put up.
It's Marianne from California.
Hi, Marianne.
I can't see the hand anywhere, but I can see the microphone. I just want to thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. And you answered so many questions that I've always had about Thomas Jefferson. It's like you went out there and did the work. Answered my questions. This is why I think divine intelligence, brought me here at 7 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, wow.
And I'm very, very grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm so glad you could join us.
Me too.
Yeah.
Suzanne,
Yes.
I have a question. You spoke about critical thinking and integrity. Oh, okay. You spoke about, is this on? Oh, okay. You spoke about integrity and critical thinking, which is sorely lacking right now. And I feel that our school systems don't teach either one of those things. But our children are taught that what's important is to get college, to get a good job, to get a good house. So where are our morals going here? Because I paid $50 a semester in California for state school. Now kids come out with 40, 50, 60, hundreds of thousands of dollars for an education to get a good job. Now we're going back to the point that kids will not be able to afford to go to college, so they will be the worker bees, and the wealthy will have the education. So where do we stand now?
Well, that is one of the criticisms that Jefferson made about higher education, was overpriced, top-heavy. But also you said that in his day, he only had like 100 students at the beginning of UVA. And so it was very easy for him to think of all those as future leaders. You know, they could be trained to be leaders. They could be trained to be critical thinkers. They could be trained to have integrity. He also wanted them trained in his political point of view and take over the country with that political point of view. That was a hidden agenda. But he wrote secretly to Madison about that. But he says that now mainly it's about job preparation. When you go to a university, that you do so in order to prepare yourself for a job. Nothing wrong with that, but how many people are taking philosophy now, you know, or how many people are taking government classes?
None.
And yes, there is an erosion of values. People are afraid to teach values. And so I think he's very concerned about that.
Well, that was true when I went to school because I used up my electives the first 2 years because philosophy for me was an elective. Integrity was not taught. It was all, and that was, I'm not even going to name how many years ago that was, but Kennedy was a new president at the time. So I think we've backslid as far as education goes. But integrity, philosophy, critical thinking is not taught. Mathematicians think like that. But unless you're a mathematician, you're not a really good thinker.
Yeah. Well, all of the educated men of his day, particularly Jefferson, was the most educated president probably ever. Studied ancient philosophy and at that time modern philosophy, John Locke and the Enlightenment philosophers. And in that, values were taught, higher values. If you read Plato's Republic, it's all about ruling with integrity and serving the people. And so they were all steeped in that. And all that's gone away now. And I'm sure that he didn't speak to that specifically, but I'm sure that he is sad about that because that's all part of critical thinking. As you take a philosophy class, you're supposed to start thinking critically.
That's true. Thank you.
Yes.
Suzanne, I'm curious, now that you've published your book and you're sharing.
Leslie, can you come over to the mic?
Now that you've published your book and you're sharing this information, do you have plans to continue your conversations with Mr. Jefferson and share those as well?
I'll check in with him from time to time. Sometimes I have a little bust of him on my desk. And sometimes I look at him and I said, you got to get on the stick here. We're not selling enough books. And so, yeah, I did. I have had some brief conversations when I'm talking with my departed friends and relatives. Somebody said, well, why don't you do you have any plans for another metaphysical book like Abraham Lincoln or Robert E. Lee? And I said, I wouldn't touch Robert E. Lee with a 10-foot pole. Somebody would murder me if he said he was sorry about the Civil War or something. Yeah. But, and I said, no, I'm interested in the colonial period and the Founding Fathers. I have no interest in I love Abraham Lincoln, but I have no interest in doing anything for him. I am very interested in an unknown colonial woman who I did channel one time, and I'd like to tell her story. I don't know that I'll live long enough to tell her story. So.
And one other question. Did Mr. Jefferson comment on the current President of the United States and the past President Trump? Did he make any comments specifically? And maybe you don't want to share that in public, or maybe
he
it's in the
did.
book.
I asked him about that, but that's not in the book.
Okay.
That would make it too topical because I want people to read this book 20 years from now. And that was kind of a private conversation. I'd rather not go there.
Okay. Thank you.
And Suzanne, I don't remember this when I read the book, but I don't believe that Thomas talked about climate change and the state of our planet, our Earth, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
No, she
Did Thomas Jefferson talk about climate change on our Earth? Just in passing, he talked a lot about the truth will out, and he said, and Mother Nature will out. Said when she's had enough, through fires and earthquakes and storms and so on, she will have her way. So, but he used a lot of natural analogies from nature in the book. They're peppered throughout the book.
Well, it's certainly been clear to anybody that's ever read anything about him or been to Monticello, his love of the land.
Yes.
From birth, and the importance of it that was passed on.
Yes, his love of the land, and he does mention that. He says that we need, in addition to critical thinking, we need quiet time. And he said, in my day, it was called contemplation. He said, I would go into the woods and I would be quiet, and I would, and he said, in your day, it's called meditation. But connect with nature is very, very important, to connect with nature.
For the sake of Zoom and also the recording, if anybody would like to ask a question, please go to the microphone in the room.
Sorry. Did he indicate that he is still in collaboration with that amazing group of people that started the country?
I think so. I think so. We went, I asked him about several of the founding fathers, Hamilton, Washington, Adams, let's see, some of the others. Franklin, yeah, Franklin. That was kind of cute. He said Franklin was a little spacey, but that, but that he had a great sense of humor, and when things would get too serious, they needed the levity. Yeah. What he said about Madison and Monroe, as most of you know, in Virginia, they were the three friends: Jefferson, Madison, and Monroe. Jefferson was older. He was Madison's mentor, and Monroe was the last of the founding father presidents. And they lived within a carriage ride of one another. They were the best of friends. He said he could not say enough good things about those Virginia founding fathers. And he had some nice things to say about Adams, too, that he had a good heart, that he was well connected with his wife, and he had gotten some of her feminine energy, that he had a kind soul. But yes, I imagine he does connect with the founding fathers. We didn't talk a whole lot about that. But he admired particularly the Virginia founding fathers. Yes.
Thank you, Suzanne, for your excellent book and excellent talk. Was there any discussion or conversation about Native American Indians?
Yes, and have you read the book?
You know, I confess I haven't, but I'm going to
it's
purchase
in the
one
book.
now and buy it.
It's
in the book.
Yes.
Okay, so there is. Can you
Yes.
just say a wee bit about it now?
Yes, Native Americans. When this just came out of the blue, I didn't expect this. But he said, now you have to remember, when he was president, apparently, and I didn't know this, I thought we'd been fighting the Indians forever, but apparently there was a peaceful time during his presidency. And he said, in retrospect, we should have partnered more with the Native Americans. He said, we took our structure from England of our white superiority. That's my word, not my term, not his, but basically that's what he meant. We took their land. We should have partnered with them. And so I went back to his address that he gave when he was president, and he did mention, I Googled Jefferson and Indians, and he had said in his presidential address that at that time things were stable with the Native American population, that it was his idea that they be taught to farm the land, not just be hunters and gatherers, but have their own land and farm it. And so I think he would have been just distressed by what Andrew Jackson did not too long after that.
Suzanne, a comment on just what you just said. One of the interesting aspects of the Native American population is that before Europeans, the Spanish, brought horses to America, they were all farmers. They only became hunters and gatherers by the disruption that was created by bringing horses, so that they had ways of migrating over distances that didn't exist before the Europeans got here in 1492. So just pass it on.
Right. Well, I think the Cherokee had begun farming in Tennessee and places like that. They had their own land, and they had legal right to the land, but it was taken away from them in Andrew Jackson's time. Any other questions? Well, you've been a great group, and thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I have some books back there. If anybody is interested, I'll sign them.
Suzanne, thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation.
Yes.
And as she just said, she has books for sale for those who would like to buy them. I've read both. They're both wonderful works, and I recommend them highly to all. If you're going to read the George Wythe book, it's better if you have an interest in history, because it is a historical account and a wonderful one. Very well researched, very well written, very insightfully presented. And both on Amazon for those in Zoom world who would like to acquire the books. And the Jefferson book is an easy read. What is it? It's just 100 and some pages, right? And so it's not the investment of time that's required for the Wythe book, but it's got some fabulous insights, as was referenced by Faith in her opening and so forth, and I highly recommend both of them. Next month, we have me, yours truly, as the speaker, and I would invite all who can to show up. We are experiencing, I would say, COVID fear and Zoom fatigue among our group, like is being experienced across the world these days. But the space we're meeting in here at River Road United Methodist Church is a wonderful meeting space.
Wonderful.
And I would invite those in the local area to, if you feel safe to come on out and join us, because we have a great meeting space here, and we'd love to have you. And anybody who wants to come on Zoom, we certainly want that too. And we're going to continue doing, and hopefully this month some of the real technical issues that we've experienced in recent months with Zoom have been ironed out. The church here has just upgraded its internet system, and so we got a very strong Wi-Fi signal in the meeting space now, and we're very grateful for that. And so we hope that the signal has been clear today. We welcome any comments or observations about that, because we want, if there's been a problem with the signal, we want to do everything we can to correct that. And the church has been very, very helpful with cooperating with us to try to improve the situation. In January, we have it'll be our 26th anniversary. We'll have Ben Campbell as our speaker, who is a locally very well-known Episcopal minister. He's an adjunct minister at St. Paul's Church, St. Paul's Episcopal Church. He is the founder of the Richmond Hill Retreat Center down on Church Hill in Richmond. And he wrote a wonderful book several years ago called Richmond's Unhealed History, which is all about the influence and impact of slavery in America and its aftermath. And it's going to be a wonderful presentation. Ben Campbell has been one of the most dynamic figures in our area to try to bring racial healing to this area. And because of Richmond's unique history in regard to this, and the fact that Richmond happens to be an energetic vortex, and one of the reasons that the Richmond IONS group has been so successful through the years, that which we can do in Richmond will have impact way beyond the geographic limitations of our area, simply because of the energy that it carries, both the negative energy of the past and the fact that we have an energetic natural configuration here that will allow the energy that we create here, for positive or negative, to be magnified across the world in ways that most places do not enjoy or are not burdened with. And so his presentation should be a wonderful one for our group. We have almost all of our speakers already lined up for 2022, in February, we're having Susanna Red Elves, who spoke to our group 8 years or 9 years ago, I think 2013. She's a fabulous channel of the Council of One. She lives in Santa Rosa, California, so she'll be coming to us by Zoom. But we still will be meeting in person, and so that'll be a great presentation. And we've got a whole good new year of good presentations, and look forward to rebuilding our membership here, or our participation. We know the members are out there, but we want to try to get them out of their closets and their basements and bring them back, and so we can all be gathering in person again. So thank you for being here today, and thank you again, Suzanne, for what was a great presentation, and look forward to seeing as many as we can next month. Thank you.
All right, and